And I shouted to her, sorry, and I looked up, but she was already on his way down. And she was twisted and turning, coming down from 700-800 foot. The bird was about 6 inches from the floor, realising it was in dead trouble. And it got to the bottom of the scree, and it was flinging itself against a big rock to get in. And she was about 10 foot on the ground, off the ground, still head first, turned over, stretched a big foot out and just plucked it up in 1 foot.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Told podcast, and what is now our 4th episode of our UK Falconry series. And of course, I'm going to give a quick shout out to the two guys that helped make this series possible, being Neil Davies from Pursuit Falconry and Conservation magazine. Pursuit Falconry magazine does a great job in promoting the art of falconry across the world, and each issue is packed with all kinds of new falconry content, ranging from articles to pictures, different kinds of artwork, equipment, etc., etc. So if you haven't subscribed yet, I highly recommend you do it. Head to pursuitfalconry.co.uk and subscribe now. And the other shout out goes to the author of The Specialist Falcon, being Simon Tyers. Simon wrote this book to kind of outline his personal approach to lowland game hawking, and it's a great book about flying long wings, especially specialized long wings in the UK. But there's a lot of great information in there and a very entertaining book to read. So if you haven't picked up a copy, I highly recommend you also going to thespecialistfalcon.com and picking up your copy now. And you can also get signed copies too from there. So definitely head there and check it out. And this episode features Ronnie Moore, who is a pretty well-known long-tenured falconer in the UK. And Ronnie is one of the few falconers that I've been able to talk to who has the good fortune to be able to say that he flew the same bird for a very long time, which you'll hear more about shortly. But Ronnie is also a new author and has a new book coming out soon, which will be discussed more here shortly too. And just so you know, in the first 8 episodes or so of this series, you might hear some occasional background noise like you might hear at the beginning of this episode. There are row crows and drones and other things being flown at the expo and different events going on that you might hear some background bleed-in noise, but not too big of a deal, but I just wanted to make you aware. But at any rate, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over now to my conversation with Ronnie Moore. I think you'll find this one pretty entertaining, so here we go. All right, Ronnie. Well, it's good meeting you, and I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and sore throat and all, and give me a little bit of your time here. How things been for you so far today?
Oh, grand. Nice to see some of the lads. I haven't seen some of them for over 40 years.
40?
Over 40 years.
Jeez, which ones are those?
Roy Lupton. I haven't seen Roy for over 40 years. And the nice thing about falconry as it was when I came into it, and obviously still into it, I haven't seen Roy for, it is over 40 years. And he'd heard I lost my goshawk, passed away with aspergillosis, and I got a message from him saying, I've heard you lost your goss, very, very sorry. He said, it's through you that my interest in golden eagles flourished, and I have a male goshawk here for you, captive bred, untouched, then it's yours if you want it. Now, that's what I think sets this game apart from a lot of other field sports. I've been involved in various field sports over my career, field trialling retrievers, shooting, fishing, which I still do, bit of running dogs, wildfowling, but something about falconry, there's something about it, if it's for you. I got into it because I'd done a lot of picking up on big commercial shoots, dispatched an awful lot of game, and at the finish I couldn't look a hen pheasant in the eye when I had to dispatch it, a prick pheasant. And I wanted to still be involved in the countryside, and I'd heard about falconry and thought, well, there, it's basically 1-to-1. If the quarry's good enough, it gets away. If it isn't, nature will take its course. And once I got into it, made some really good friends. You've met a few around here. The last one you met, Andy Kenyon, I first met Andy in 1976. So, and that, again, is an awful long time ago.
It is. That's impressive. I can only hope, well, I guess I jokingly say this, I guess for some of my friends, I hope I don't have to deal with them for that long, but...
Well, if you have, they won't be friends.
Yeah.
Simple as.
Yeah.
Simple as.
Yeah.
But falconry's given me everything.
Yeah.
It's given me respect. It's given me so much pleasure. And the interaction between the hunted and the hunter. And it's basic nature. It's basic nature to me. And nature will take its course. Sometimes you give it a bit of a hand. But usually the best flights, are the ones where the quarry gets away. Mm-hmm. And it outwits the hunter. Mm-hmm. And I've dined with lords and ladies. I've been on access to some of the best shoots in this country, all through falconry and birds of prey. And in my book, I'm financially poor, but I'm friends rich. And I won't have it any other way.
There's a lot of guys that are like that. I've talked to several guys that have that same mentality. You know, they value the relationships and the experiences way more than any kind of monetary amount they've ever made, or haven't made in a lot of their cases. And yeah, they know that they're not wealthy in the pocketbook, but they're wealthy in all the other aspects of their life. Well,
I've certainly been lucky. It's an old saying, and it particularly to me relates to falconry, because you can get, like in any sport, one or two unsavoury characters. And any new falconer that's come and asked me for advice, or will you show me this and will you that? I will. I'll get to know them, and I'll just give them one piece of advice, and that's, if you lay down with dogs, you'll pick up fleas. Stay clean.
Yeah, that's a good piece of advice. Yeah, that's I think there's a lot to be said for that, and because there's so much worry, and I guess rightfully so, that our sport and our heritage is going to eventually be looked at in an overwhelmingly negative light, and that's why we like doing these podcasts and things, so that people can listen and get a good idea of all the positive things about our sport and this heritage that we've come to love, and it's opened up so many opportunities for us. So.
Well, I can imagine when I came into it, there was, in this country, there was very much them and us. Mm-hmm. There was, shall we say, the grouse-hawking hierarchy and the scrag ends, such as people like me. But luckily, you are judged on your hawk and your dog's performance in the field. Not how much money you've got or what sort of car you drive. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's how it should be.
Sure.
That's how it should be. Mm-hmm. And we all learn. Nobody was born a falconer. Nobody knows everything. Mm-hmm. You can always learn something from every single person here, probably. Mm-hmm. But you have to, as you go through, you're gathering experience and you're gathering knowledge. You don't know you're doing it. Mm-hmm. And I can remember seeing somebody out in the field a couple of years ago thinking, what on earth has he done that for? And then I thought to myself, well, I used to do that. And that is how you learn. And this game, you learn by your mistakes. And if you get it wrong, the mistakes are very, very, very costly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why people that tend to repeat them, they don't succeed or stay in for very long.
Well, again, harping back to the good old days, call it what you want, and I'm not looking back with rose-coloured glasses. If you were lucky enough to get a hook, you got one chance. Mm-hmm. You couldn't say, oh, this isn't for me, I'll get another one, now let's see what's in the catalogues. You got one chance, and you have to make it. Mm-hmm. And to me, a mate of mine said to me once, you don't bend a hook to what you want, to your will. You try and make yourself to work with that hook and do it its way, but yet still do the things that you want to do together. And they're like a human being. No two people are the same. No two hawks are the same. And it's knowing what perhaps not to do with one and perhaps what to try with another. The hawk I really, really cherish more than anything was my golden eagle. And we built up a hunting partnership. I'd like to think, I would never take liberties with her, and I would not expect her to take liberties with me. And we came to a working agreement. I know it sounds funny. It's not a person, it's a hawk. But we came to a working agreement. And it worked on my side anyway. Unfortunately, you can't ask her because she sadly passed away a few years ago at the age of 30.
30. You had the same golden eagle for 30 years.
Yes. And I flew her every single season.
It's incredible. That's keeping any species for any longer than a handful of years sometimes can be a huge challenge, especially if you're hawking them every day and hunting them like you're supposed to. And I mean, that's incredible.
Well, I used to hunt mine like a wild one would from the saw. Mm-hmm. I didn't hunt it off the fist. I wanted to see what a wild one could do under semi-trained conditions. And when she eventually decided that she would work with me, she let me into her world. Mm-hmm. And I'm eternally grateful for the years I had. Look at it this way. I started hunting her when I was 34, and I was still hunting her when I was 62.
Wow. That's absolutely nuts.
Think of all the years, past 28 years in your life, and how your life changed. And think about it that way.
Yeah, well, like I said, as we discussed earlier, 20-something years ago, I was still in elementary / grade school.
And in the early days, we had no telemetry. Yeah. Nothing. Mm-hmm. Well, when you've got a golden eagle at 2,500 foot with no telemetry, and it can go anywhere it wants, but it chooses to stay with you. You've done something right.
Yeah, I mean, once again, I can't say it enough. That's incredible, because especially not having GPS and all the, even beeping telemetry or anything, for so many of those years. I mean, did you ever get the newer technology when it came available, or
no? I'm still using, or was still using, one of your American lads called Don Boundowski. Him and Frank Taylor and a couple of other lads came over about 1986, and I'd organised a grouse hawking meeting. I heard they were in the area, and I rang the owner of the estate up. And he said, invite your friends. So that made the party up. It was 2 days. They fed us both days. And they were wonderful sporting hosts. And I asked, because he lived, it was the telemetry everybody wanted in those days was custom. And there's a blue box called an RB4. Well, prior to that, I had a homemade set with a wooden aerial with wires coming out of it, and a preamped Motorola radio, which was 2 big 6-volt batteries linked up to make 12-volt. It was push button, and it weighed 9.5 pounds. And I used to carry that round all the time. After I didn't once and had to go back to the car for it. So I carried it around all the time. And I asked Don Bandowski, I said, have you got any pull at customs? He said, why? I said, well, any chance of a discount? So he got back to me. And he said, can't get you any discount. He said, they worked, a lot of work. He said, we can't even get you delivery for 6 weeks, 2 months. He said, but would you be interested in a second-hand unit? I said, as long as it worked, yeah. He said, well, one of my apprentices is packing in. I've lent it him. I'll get it back. About a week later, I got a phone call from him. He said, right, there's a parcel for you down at your local post office. He said, you might have a little bit of duty to pay. And so I said, what do I owe you? He said, you owe me nothing. And he sent me a customs RB4 set, a aerial to match it, what they called a 3-stage transmitter. In those days, you had a normal one aerial coming out full length, and then you had a little short stubby aerial called a ground aerial, and that was called a 3-stage transmitter, and you put 2 1.5 batteries in it. And when I opened the parcel, there was the receiver, there was the aerial, there was a 3-stage transmitter, and a pair of bald eagle braces to keep my trousers up while I'm out looking for the eagle. That's falconry. That's falconers. And I still use that set today.
Still do it.
Still, in fact, I've lent it to a friend as it is here, a lad called Professor Mark Fielder. And he's got it. And he's using it now.
Well, that also goes a lot to saying how much more durable and higher quality a lot of some of the older products could be, too. They were made to last.
Well, a very dear friend who we lost early this year called Peter Wall, probably the clumsiest man you ever come across in your life. He's dropped his 3 times in the river, run over it twice with his car, and it still worked.
Jeez.
And it still worked. Got hats off to Custom Electronics.
Pretty much all the newer normal appliances, as you know, are pretty much built, it seems to break down after like 5 years or something. So well, everything from your washers and dryers to, so I mean, if you can have that one little bit of reliability in that aspect of your life that's supposed to bring you happiness and joy.
The custom set never ever let me down. The only thing with it, if you got really close and you had, like I had a really, really good male Goshawk once, very, very successful, but didn't want to be found if you caught something. And you could be in very thick cover, you could be within 2 or 3 yards of it, and he'd just freeze on his kill. And what you did then is unclip the aerial and just walk round with the box till you got a bead on it. Apart from that, direction perfect. You haven't got the range of the modern stuff. In fact, Simon Tyres, he was telling me when I stopped with him 2 or 3 weeks ago, with the GPS, you can even see what tree it's sat in, basically what branch. Just to have a signal was an event. The early telemetry that came out, a friend of mine, another past falconer, a very famous falconer called John Fairclough, he got a set, one of the early made-up, homemade ones, and he spent 2 hours in the pouring rain tracking an electric fence with it. And then till he got his customs. Well, he ended up getting a Luxander set, a Louis Luxander set. But when you got no telemetry, your senses, you got back to being a primeval animal. You listen for little birds pinking. You'd watch for corvids dipping. You'd watch for an odd movement of a gull. And they were your distance locators. And when you were looking for a hawk sometimes without telemetry, I was one after one that somebody cut off my perch. I could have written a thesis for a PhD on corvid behaviour. They don't all mob it. They don't all follow it. The spotters, there's ones that mob it, and mixing with those, there's today's dinner, the gormless ones that just wander about on the floor. And you learn an awful lot about wild bird behaviour. And that's what I think the only thing really you have missed with telemetry is picking nature's signs up when there is a predator in the area.
I've still had to use those signs before, even with GPS and stuff. I mean, just because you get a really accurate pinpoint doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to see the bird right away or whatever, I mean, so it's always nice knowing those age-old, traditional methods because they're just as useful as everything else. A few years ago, we got a phone call, a garbled message on the answer phone. It was Christmas Eve. And this lad now lives in Canada, a lad called Mark Williams. He's quite well known in the falconry game now, is Mark. And he lived in Bournemouth. And the message turned out to be he had a goshawk in the garage that had injured its leg, free-lofted. His wife had come home, forgot about the goshawk, opened the garage door, and at 5:30 on a Christmas Eve, it was out, gone. All he had on was one bell. So he rang me up. What's your chances of finding that in a town, the edge of it, or towards the edge of a town? I said, where's your nearest water? He said, well, there is a stream. This is God's honest truth, not one word made up, down off the main artillery road. So I said, we'll go down there. This is get to 6:30, Christmas Eve. I said, stop. I said, what sort of heard a bell? So I can't hear anything. I said, stand there. Tinkle, tinkle. I can hear it. And there was no leaf on the tree. It was a deciduous tree. And there it was, sat in the tree. What's your chances? This is when you look with looking for a bird, goes with you. So I said, right, we'll leave it there till morning. We went out in the morning, it had gone, and it went, there's a big hospital there now, Bournemouth Hospital, and behind that is the retired nurses' quarters, and there's
magpies chattering all over the place. And he said, it's got to be over there. All those magpies are over there. And then we went up, never saw it, nothing. And then I just heard one magpie make a funny noise. And he said, all those are over there. It's got to be over there. There's half a dozen of them there. I said, just let me check this out, will you? And I peeped through the hedge, and there it was on the floor. So as I moved in towards it, I spooked it. It took off, crashed into the bottom glass of the woman's door, was laid on its back. He burst into tears. He thought it was dead. And, you know, emotionally you get when you're looking, and then you get, and he thought it was dead. I said, well, it isn't, but I thought it was. But I picked it up, opened my shirt and stuffed it inside my shirt. I said, it's not going to bloody die here. It's not going to die, you know. Like thinking it was. Then as we're walking across the field, I suddenly stopped. He said, what's to do? I said, I'll tell you something. I said, what? I said, it's not dead. It had both its feet right into my stomach. I said, I'm not taking it out here. We'll get back to the house. We took it in the garage, took it out, put it on there. Christmas morning, I was back home for 8:30. That's when you ride your luck. What is the chances of that? Only because I'd heard a magpie make an odd noise.
You have to use the resources that are at your disposal at any given time, and sometimes, if you're fortunate enough, yeah, it'll be something like a bird noise or...
Well, the first wild peregrine I ever saw in this country was 1979, and I was flying my golden eagle up in the Yorkshire Dales, and it was waiting on, and next minute I heard kek. I didn't know what it was. Then I looked up, and it was a peregrine teasel stooping at the eagle. It stooped at her 2-3 times, and each time she side shuffled, and it went past her. And it came down again, and she obviously lost her rag with it, turned on her back and showed it at her feet. Next minute, the peregrine teasel was off, with the eagle in hot pursuit, and the eagle was closing on it, and went into the wind, way out of my sight. So no telemetry. So I started off thinking, that's it, it's gone. After 10 minutes, I saw this white stuff blowing back downwind towards me. I thought, Christ almighty, my first peregrine in the wild. And she's killed it. But luckily it wasn't. It was fur, the underbelly fur of a rabbit that she'd killed. But the interesting thing to me was, she didn't mind it when it came out, but when she lost her rag and she turned on her back and showed it her feet, that bloody peregrine knew that means business. Mm-hmm. Now, how did that know? This is the interaction you get between wildlife. And with falconry, you just get an insight into the natural world around you. That's what I think. It's fascinating. Yeah. Fascinating.
Oh, for sure. Well, I mean, so was it just that interaction in general then, or was there a even more specific incident that kind of turned you on to the sport, or really just...
It was a lot of it as well. It was the camaraderie. There was no Facebook then. There was no snide comments and people trying to stab somebody else in the back. We were all in the same boat. And if one lad's hook was out, we were all out looking for it. There was no, you're on your own, kid, stopping in bed. We were all out. And I was grouse hawking once in Scotland. I was... As I've said earlier, I'm financially poor. I was always somebody's guest. And if a falcon was out, we were all out at night. And the thing was, when you got it back, the person whose falcon it was usually treated everybody that had been out to a slap-up meal at a very, very expensive restaurant. And I was always worrying that if my hawk was out, I'd have to do that. Luckily, it wasn't. But at the finish, when you'd lived on a croft at the edge of a moor and hadn't eaten particularly well, you were perhaps thinking it back of your mind, I hope so-and-so's falcon gets out tonight, because if it does, we'll get a bloody decent meal tomorrow. But it was the whole camaraderie of the game.
Yeah.
And you stick with friends. Most of the people I come across then were through the British Falconers Club, because that then, a club was the only way that you met other falconers. There was nobody else down the pub. There was you. And it was at club meetings that you met other falconers. You soon know, like any human being, you know whether you're on the same wavelength with somebody. And if you're not, well, they don't bother you, you don't bother with them. But what you have to be, in my book, all your life, is you have to be you. Don't try to be something you're not, because it'll backfire. Even when you're in the biggest big house with a big estate, just be yourself. Just be, and people will accept you.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah, I mean, it's all I ever expect of people too, is just be real. You know, just don't try and be fake or, you know, just something you're not. Yeah, just as long as you're real. And
I don't get any pleasure in looking at hawks and falcons on the blocks. Mm. I don't look at it, oh Christ, what a gorgeous. I like to see it working.
Yeah. That's where the real beauty is in it.
It is to me.
Yeah.
It is to me. A friend of mine was saying to another very, very good falconer in this country, lad called Alistair McKissock, he was up in Scotland, said, oh, a beautiful falcon, you know, a beautiful falcon always performs wonderfully. Alistair said, not in my book. He said, I had the ugliest bloody misshaped falcon he said you've ever seen in your life, but it was the best falcon I ever had. And you can see with the falcon, John Fairclough, Simon was handling them. There was one called Jet and one called Jade, and they were two sisters out the same litter, same year. And on the fist, Jet was always, when she fed, she was always off balance and pulling the bloody food and levelling her wings out to try and level it up. And Jade always fed delicately, always had balance. And when they flew, Jade had that bit of something that Jet didn't. Jet probably would never have made it if it was a wild falcon. That was two sisters, raised the same. One was they both looked the same, they both looked beautiful. But yet the other one had poise and balance, and the other one was as clumsy as buggery.
I've flown some birds that really weren't that great to look at. But, you know, I've also had some birds and known some other guys that have had birds that really just weren't the biggest or the most ideal specimens or whatever, but they were some of the best hunters. So I understand what you're saying in that regard.
We were always very limited. The only way you could then get a golden eagle, shall we say, was take from the wild, a licensed bird. There was no captive breeding, none or almost no captive breeding of goshawks, and certainly not falcons. So the only way you could get your hands on a goshawk was an import license. Usually they were started off from Finland, I think, and then Czechoslovakia, Hungary. Everybody wanted the Finnish hawks because, as usual, big is beautiful, so they say. But my ideal goshawk, I flew goshawks for 45 years without a break, and my ideal goshawk would be a male goshawk that probably hunted about 115, something like that. That would be me. It had the agility of a male, and yet big enough so you're not stretching it much on rabbits. I was lucky to get my hands on a really, really good male way back in 77. I swapped a passage female for it because he had a male. He didn't like males. He said all they're good for is water hens. And I had a passage female, which he wanted. So I swapped it unseen. And I took it out 4 days later on an estate. The woodcock got up. It went off to that woodcock. Didn't catch it. Without telemetry, it took us about an hour to find it. Any sensible falconer would have gone home. But I got it back. And I went on this shoot, on shoot day, so I knew which way the birds would fly. So I positioned everybody out on the track at the bottom. I went to the top with the goss, flushed a hen pheasant. This was last week in January. Off went the goss, disappeared into the wild blue yonder. I thought, how stupid can you get? Come back down, the keeper was there. I said, did you see out of it? He said, I've never seen anything like it in my life. He said, there was a hen pheasant flying across the valley, which then, it was a driven shoot, so it would have been 40 yards up, something like that. He said, and all of a sudden, there was this grey blur that came underneath it, and they come whistling down and crashed into those roadies over there. That's when I realised I had a prize on my hands. And I had. And he was probably the best all-round goshawk male I've ever seen. I've seen better on rabbits than better on partridge, but not an all-round goss like he was. I was lucky. I got it unseen. That's your luck. That's your luck. And he was very, very independent. He could, if he missed, he could do what you want. You wouldn't get him back till he'd clear the wood out. He'd hunt the wood completely out, and once he found out there's nothing in there, he'd work his way back to you and come straight down. Mm-hmm. So that's what I give him. I give him his head. I could have flown him tighter, but you wouldn't have seen what he could do.
Yeah. Oh, that's understandable. But I mean, so you did fly several other species then before you flew your golden eagle then?
I flew my golden eagle probably earlier than I should have done. But I started off a buzzard, a European buzzard, and I wanted to fly it like wild buzzards fly, not chuck it in a tree, beat round it, don't catch anything with it, and then go on to a goss. And I flew it like a wild one flew. I flew it on the soar like a wild one flew. And I struggled to get a kill with it. And when I thought my day had come, I put it up. It was soaring away about 300 foot. I was working the dog. Next minute, I see it turn over and stoop. I heard it crash down into the heather, and its feet were going, and I thought, I've actually done it. I got up there, shouted to my dog to lie down. I got up there, the dog was laid down. The buzzard was about 20 yards away, mantling in the heather. I thought, I'd better get in quick and dispatch it. And it was a big piece of sheep wool. The dog had obviously dislodged it with its nose. It went rolling backwards downwind over the heather, and the buzzard came down and took it. I went from, as in falconry, and anything in falconry, 1 minute you're at the top of Everest, next minute you're at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. And that's how it goes. But it taught me a lot. And it taught me a lot about wind and about what a broadwing or an eagle needs to get lift. And a lot of it, unless you're involved with it, you don't understand it. I was out with a keeper after blue hares, and there was a big, we call it a gill hole. It was like a little valley, and it was about 35 yards wide. And on the other side of that valley was a blue hare sat there. And the keeper couldn't understand why the eagle couldn't just fly straight across that valley and have a go at it. This is what goes up must come down, and you had a downdraft and a depression. And the eagle would just sat there on the side of me, watching. And then as the wind started to lift, she'd lift off, and then she'd go sideways up and down the valley trying to get higher, and then come back and land again. So we just sat there and watched. And then eventually she got high, and she could get over the depression. Just as it got over there, the hare dived into a ditch, and we lost sight of it. But that taught me again about lift and conditions. And I was flying on an estate once, and one of the guests, the landowner's guest, he was chief test pilot for British Aerospace. And his name, funny enough, was called David Eagles. And he used to fly gliders as well. And he was watching her. She was up. She'd been way up there for at least an hour. And he was watching through the binoculars. And I said, what do you think of it, Mr. Eagles? He said, what that eagle's just done is aerodynamically impossible. I said, well, perhaps the good Lord is a better designer of aircraft than British Aerospace has. He was watching what she did with the primaries and her tail, and how she was moving her tail feathers. And then you watch, and this is what you pick up. And I could go on a shoot, and they'd plan this drive. I said, it won't work. Why won't it work? I said, because the wind's coming over the top of that hill, and there's a downdraft. Your pheasants won't get up. Well, we'll see about that. And of course, they didn't.
Yeah.
And this is another branch of falconry. What I did where I flew the eagle, you can't do it anymore. There's too many people about. I flew on ground where there wasn't a soul. Now in Scotland, where you've got the open spaces to fly blue hares, you can't hunt blue hares anymore. That's finished. Sadly, whether it'll come back, I don't know. But getting to your question, I started off with buzzard. I didn't get a kill, but I hacked it back. And I was out one day, I got my first goshawk. I was working this patch of cover, and then suddenly the goss looked up. And the buzzard that I'd hacked back months earlier, came and landed in a tree at the side of me. I thought, well, I can't slip the goss. So the dog was marking a duck, which I thought was a duck. When I put it into flush, it was what we call a water hen, this little black bird. The goss baited at it. Out of the tree came the buzzard and took the water hen. I never had a kill with it in captivity. She took one in front of when she'd been back in the wild 6 months. And the farmer told me he'd seen it take rats, half-grown rabbits. I'd seen it take a water hen. That pleased me more than you can ever imagine, that she went back there and she could earn a living on her own bat. So then I flew her. Then I got my first goss, which was a passage female. Then I swapped that for this male who I flew him for 9 seasons, something like that. And then he got killed in a breeding aviary. And then another mate of mine very kindly gave me a female. And I've had my share over the years. I've never sold one. And I've always flown them for 45 years. And then me and my other half had a blazing row because I took the goss out and I shouldn't have taken it out. It was blowing a gale. I had bad cataracts. Once the goss had gone 60 yards, I couldn't see it. And the only way I knew, I'd just let the dog hunt and see if the dog marked it if it killed. Or I'd swing a lure around and it had come back. And this particular time, it mounted into the wind and killed over the top of some cliffs. And I went out the morning after it had killed. And she buzzed the lure, but she wouldn't come in. And then it landed on some cliffs, and I put my life at risk trying to climb the cliffs to get it back. And I didn't. And my other half said, "You're not having another." So we agreed that the finish, I'd have one last one. And then whatever happens, that would have been it. And I thought it would have took me into my 80s, but it didn't. It got aspergillosis. So I packed in 2 years ago at the grand old age of them, was it 70, 76, 77. And miss it greatly. But the quarry's gone. We got VHD, a rabbit disease. The rabbits have gone. The last 3 times I was out with a goss, I didn't get a slip. And I thought, perhaps it is the right time.
Yeah, and that's like the worst thing that can happen with a goshawk too, is to not show it game.
And your spaniel's working its guts out, trying to produce fire, and it can't. But all the time, my main thing was the golden eagle. And given everything on its merits, everything perfect weather conditions, perfect wind, perfect supply of quarry, in my book, there is absolutely nothing to touch a golden eagle when it's hunting properly. They are the most amazing creature. I saw it. We were hunting a rock screen, a howling gale, and she was way above me. I saw a flash of grey at the side of me, which I thought was a rabbit. So my call when quarry was shouted was hare, hare. I shouted hare, hare. And then I looked down and she was twisted and turning, coming down from 700-800 foot. The bird was about 6 inches from the floor, realising it was in dead trouble. And it got to the bottom of the scree and it was flinging itself against a big rock to get in. And she was about 10 foot on the ground, off the ground, still head first. Turned over, stretched a big foot out and just plucked it up in 1 foot and landed with it. Now, a female golden eagle in a howling gale, what sort of agility have you got to do that?
Yeah, I mean, that's why we, I think, fall in love with these birds like we do, is because they do so many amazing things that I think we wish that we could. Those are some pretty amazing stories. I'm sure that you've got hundreds, thousands of them or whatever. But
well, without plugging anything, over the years I've been oined. I don't know what oin means. It's usually a Northern England expression. People have been badgering me to put everything down on paper. So I actually did. And seemingly I did 147,799 words in one long paragraph on a 10-year-old iPad, and when that broke down, an iPhone. And my mate, my intelligent late friend, I would send him a chapter that was in one long paragraph, and he would put it into paragraphs and sentences. And Bob Dalton, who you know has got that wonderful lugger project, he's very kindly doing all the layout for me. He's had it proofread, all for nothing. And any book that is sold, a donation from every copy will go to his lugger project. I haven't done it to make any money. All I wanted to do was do it because he actually said to me, not only should you do it, it's your duty to do it. Because when you go, that will go with you. And that's why it was done. All I wanted was to write it down and sell a few copies to give me mates. But if it does make a bob or two, I won't turn it down. But that's why it was done. So it's all most of it's down. So that was my career. I did grouse hawk for the kind of 20 years. Started off trying to catch grouse with a second-hand passage lanner. Knocked 2 down, didn't kill. Then somebody wanted a prairie female. They wanted it manning and flying before it went in a breeding aviary. And all I can say about a prairie is I'm glad it's a good job they don't weigh 10 pounds because you'd be in trouble with them. They've got beaks like tin openers. When they baited off, they didn't bait off in fear, they baited off in anger. And if you put your finger anywhere near it, it'd have half your finger off. A friend of mine got a hybrid, and he was telling me about it. It had killed a grouse, and it was a beautiful September afternoon. He was in his shirt sleeves. It was sat aside with the grouse, watching it plume the grouse, enjoying life. And he said it suddenly stopped, left the grouse, walked over to him, walked up to his arm, bit a lump out of his arm, turned round and walked back to the grouse again. And I said, that's the prairie, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then I was very kindly given a peregrine teasel, and I flew peregrine for grouse hawk for about 20 years. I always had pointers, but the mainstay throughout my falconry career was my Ailsa, my golden eagle.
It's a wealthy history. I'm glad that you decided to put everything down on paper, though, and now I'm glad that you decided to put a voice to it as well. But you know, that's the only downside. And I was telling Bob and a couple of the other guys this earlier that's the only thing that makes me sad a little bit is knowing in this venture that as many of these falconers as I want to get the pleasure to know a little bit and record and make conversations available for the better part of the world to listen to. The bummer is that there's going to be some people that don't want to do it and don't think it's for them, and I totally understand. But at the same time, it's just like I feel like there's going to be a lot of conversations and stuff that and a lot of knowledge that's not unfortunately going to be able to be passed on from that. But.
Well, it was Bob actually that did give me the proper kick, because he said not only should you, it's your bloody duty to do it. So it's his fault. It's his fault basically, but it's done. It's finished now. It's out of it. One of the things that got me, and this only happened about 4 years ago, and I'd flown goshawks then for 40 odd years. And the last goshawk I got, it was unseen. I saw it on the internet, and the other one I'd just lost. And I got it home, and it wouldn't do anything. It would not do anything. It wasn't interested. It was an IS. Somebody else had it. God knows what they'd done to it. I don't know. But it just wasn't. And once it had finished feeding, it didn't want to know you. And 6 weeks, usually, I got them flying free and hunting. It's again to 3. And I kept going up there. Time it had finished its food, I would put it back on its screen. Then it would look at me and shriek and bait away. And I'd come back down, and Val, my other half, said, any joy? I said, no. I said, tell you what, this is now middle of October. I said, if I can get it flying free for end of season, which is the end of January, I'll consider myself done a good job. She said, you're joking? I said, I'm not. Then one day, I went up there and feeding it. I'm walking toward its screen perch, and it's just finishing off its food, and it turned its head, and lifted its head up to me and looked at me, and then put down, and then started picking the little bits off my glove. That was what I've been waiting for. 30 years earlier, I wouldn't have known what that meant.
Yeah.
It took perhaps I'm a slow learner, but it took all that time to realise, right, She's now accepted you. Mm-hmm. Within a week, it was away. But only experience can teach you that.
And honestly, I think we sometimes forget that something can be, some of these birds can just be that stubborn, number one, but that intelligent. And sometimes, some of these birds, they just...
And they're looking, but birds, hawks are like humans. Look in their eyes.
Yeah.
And its demeanour, its eyes changed. It just turned sideways, went down like that, and then started just picking those little bits off your glove. And I thought, I was so proud that I'd actually got a reaction. And then we romped on. After that, we romped on.
So usually when you get the side eye like that from a goshawk, it usually means something else.
First chance I'm off, kid.
For sure. Well, real quick, I mean, before we finish up here, I kind of want to get your perspective, because you were around back when you could get birds from the wild and stuff here. I mean, what's kind of been your perspective and the change from the way things were and then the way they are now? And
first of all, we couldn't trap them. You could get a license to take one from the nest. There's no trapping.
Just as an IS. Then.
There's no just yeah.
Gotcha.
You had to apply. There was the what they called. There was the golden eagle, and the merlin, and the peregrine, and usually they were only in Scotland, where they were supposed to be the main body of them, shall we say. Now I've been involved. I've been to 2 peregrine eyries. Legally, I might add. Mm-hmm. Both birds were taken under licence. Firstly, one licence was granted in England. A friend of mine sorted a site out for the lucky licensee, and I had to go as an observer. There had to be an observer there that was, shall we say, acknowledged by the BTO, British Trust Ornithology, and the government, to observe that the rules were being followed to the letter. So that's one eyrie I went into. The second eyrie, the British Falconers Club, had got a licence to take one for captive breeding, and I took that under the British Falconers Club licence. What got me was, when I went in to the eyrie, there was an abseil down. The parents were screaming their heads off, shrieking and screaming. Mm-hmm. There had to be 3 in the nest. Mm-hmm. You had to take the smallest, which we wanted. Luckily, it was a male, because we wanted a male. To make sure that nobody could say we'd fiddled it, we bought a newspaper of the day with the date on of the day and put the 3 irises and photographed them on there. What struck me about taking one from the wild were those distraught parents. Mm-hmm. And that was taken 1985, 86. I can still remember that. Somebody once, when hybridisation came in, you're not going to believe this, but this I can assure you is 100% true. There's Lenny and Diana Derman Walters. Lenny unfortunately passed away, but Diana's still here. And they'd heard that the French Falconry Club had invited Steve Baptiste over to show them how to AI. And they'd realised that the future of obtaining hawks was going to be through AI. They approached the British Falconers Club. They were told that they weren't prepared to put any money forward to get them to show them. One member said, well, AI, it's a captive bred bird. It won't know how to hunt. And in fact, even if you could get it to hunt, nobody can fly it because nobody's written a book on how to train one. It sounds absolutely bizarre, but it was true.
Yeah.
My opinion, it would still be nice if somebody does want to take it. There are plenty of falcons, they've been knocked on the head. They're nesting in areas they've never nested before because everything else, or the traditional sites, are full up. I can't see a problem of taking one, but I wouldn't like to take one again after that. After that kerfuffle. Captive goshawks. What I did find when I'd handled from a passage birds, which my early ones were all passage and one haggard. The captive breds, the F2s possibly, they might not imprint, but they condition very quickly. You know, you can even get one, they hear your footsteps going up to the aviary to feed them. I've flown totally parent-reared eyes. I've flown crash-reared. I've never flown an imprint because I don't know how to handle one, and it's not my scene, I'm afraid. Leave it to the lads that want to do it. They want to do it. What you can say in the favour of an imprint, there is less stress on the hawk, which has got to be good for the hawk. But if you'd have said, what is it now, 50 years ago, this, nobody would have believed you.
Yeah.
Nobody. Lenny went to America. He went to he stopped with Steve Baptiste, and he said, you couldn't believe the weathering ground. If anybody, when I started, if anybody actually saw an intermewed goshawk on the weathering ground, it was an event, because mainly they lost them in the first season because they were back to the wild, or a peregrine, everybody would rush over and look at it. But what Lenny did say when he went to the NAFA field meeting, he said, which was quite a good quote, he said, you set foot on the weathering ground and half the hawks bowed to you. So they were all imprints. All imprints, yeah. Perhaps I've missed out by not flying an imprint, but I don't think I have.
Yeah, so it's another one of those personal preference things. I mean,
to me, in everything in life, they're always trying to reinvent the wheel. And whatever you think of, it's all been done. It's all been done before. I'm a traditionalist, but you shouldn't let tradition overrule common sense. It's like saying, oh, they never used to use telemetry, so I won't. That's just daft. Yeah. You have to use the technology that's available.
Well, it's like, I've talked with other guys before that were also traditionalists and stuff, but I asked them the same question is, I mean, if it was available, do you not think that like Frederick and a lot of those guys would have loved GPS or whatever?
Of course they would.
I'm sure that they probably wouldn't have instantly turned their nose up at it. Let's just put it that way.
My mate, the lad that made that beautiful stick, Darren Chadwick, I respect Chaddy's opinion. He's an excellent countryman and he's a first-class falconer, is Chad. And he was thinking of going into GPS. And there's never been anybody more sceptical as Chaddy and me. And he went into it, and I said, what do you make of it? He said, absolutely incredible. You're not wandering around a field with an aerial, getting bounced back, having to triangulate marks. He said, you can just see where it is.
Yeah.
And when his last one went in a snowstorm, and he never got it back, that's when he went for GPS. Basically, I just looked at what happened to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it has its issues sometimes too, just like everything. But I know I love it. I use it pretty regularly, and there's a lot to be said for just being able to go and drive right to where your bird's at, call it back down if it happens to catch some wind or do something that ends up going a mile or two down or whatever, instead of having to sit there and try and track it, even just traditional ways or beep or whatever. Just being able to drive up. 10 minutes later, you've got your bird back, as opposed to just spending the rest of your day potentially just
mull this over. You're out there, a gust of wind's caught it, away it goes, and you've got nothing. And you've got nothing. Never mind a beep. You've got nothing.
Yep.
The first time I used that telemetry that weighed 9.5 pounds with the wooden aerial bit was at a field meeting. The goshawk went rocketing over the top of a very, very high edge after a cock pheasant. Went to the car and got a beep. By the time I got round the hedge, it had gone. Cut a long story short, I spent 2 hours going in a complete circle. Never saw the hook, and it was moving. At the finish, I managed to pin it down to an area the size of not much bigger than that transit van. Very, very thick. And I couldn't believe it was in there. It was that thick I couldn't get the aerial in. So at the finish, I managed to dig a tunnel, got in there, and I just sat there. And I thought, somebody's looking at me. And down to my left was the goshawk. And as soon as it saw me, it tried to go deeper into the cover. And the only reason I know what it was, because apart from one tail feather, it was completely bald, and it was a wood pigeon. And he'd flown with it. Every time he landed, he'd plume a bit more. And by the time all it had left in was one feather.
Yeah.
Now, without telemetry, he was lost.
Well, that's a lot of stuff that I'm glad that you've shared with us all today, and I appreciate it. And you said this book that you've written with all these other amazing stories that we haven't heard yet. You said is it already out? It can be bought right now?
Not at the moment. Bob Dalton is very kindly doing the layout.
Still a ways to go yet then.
Well, he said that hopefully there may be a proof copy out next week, maybe the week after.
Okay.
All I wanted to do was get it off my chest, like I said, and get a free copy for my mates. But you can if you're going to do it right. It'll be on good paper. It will be if Bob's anything to do with it, it'll be class. Judge for yourself. If the writing's class, that's up to you. But every single word of it is true, and it's not just on the field; it's off the field.
Well, what's it going to be called then?
Well, I wanted to call it Memoirs. Let me just get this right. This is what I wanted to call it: Memoirs of a Hunting Falconer. But Bob said, if you have hunting in it, Facebook won't touch it. This is a sign of the times.
Yeah.
So it's I think it's come down. It's a line from the John Denver song called "The Eagle and the Hawk." Do you know the song?
I've heard of it.
Well, it was way back, written in 1972, and it sums up my career with Eagles and Hawks. I think it's "Come Dance on the West Wind." And it's memoir seemingly of a master falconer, which I ain't any good at self-publicity. I'd prefer hunting falconer. But he said, Facebook won't touch it, and that's your free advertising. Yeah. So I've gone with his advice, really.
And where will people be able to pick it up when it comes out?
I don't know. Bob's sorted all that out. I've got quite a few orders off the lads for signed copies. One way or another, we'll get them sorted from them. So this isn't a publicity thing. It's just that I'm not very good at self-publicity.
Oh, it's fine though. But I want people to be able to have access to your other memories and stories and stuff though. So
before I go this afternoon, I've got a hardback printed rough copy there, so you can have a look at the bits in it, the chapters. It's quite funny chapters, I think, really. I think one of them that sticks in my mind is cake and testicles. So that's going to make quite a few people stop.
Well, I think that's the perfect note to end on. And I mean, like you said, thank you again so much for giving me an hour or so of your time here. And
it's a pleasure to have met you, sir.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And
if you ever bump into Don Bandowski, please tell him I'm still using the set with it.
Okay.